سبحان الله
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله وكفى وسلام على عباده الذين اصطفى خصوصا على سيد الرسل وخاتم الأنبياء وعلى آله الأزكياء وأصحابه الأتقياء أما بعد. We gather here today to start a new series of classes, and inshallah al-Aziz, in the weeks to come we will be covering the text of Imam Ghazali rahmatullahi alayhi, known as Bidayat al-Hidaya. In today's class, inshallah, I'd like to give an introduction to the class, an introduction to the book, and a third introduction to the author, inshallah al-Aziz. And once we have these three pieces put together, it'll help us understand what we're doing in the weeks to come, inshallah. The first thing is that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he encourages us through his beautiful traditions to seek knowledge. The Prophet ﷺ says, the example of the one who seeks knowledge, or the comparison, the virtue of the one who seeks knowledge over the one who does not have knowledge, is like comparing the Prophet ﷺ with the lowest of you. فَضْلُ الْعَالِمِ عَلَى الْعَابِدِ كَفَضْلِ عَلَى أَدْنَاكُمْ. Now, how can one make a comparison between the Prophet ﷺ and anyone, let alone the lowest of us? The Prophet ﷺ is giving that example of the scholar and the worshipper, not just any person. فَضْلُ الْعَالِمِ عَلَى الْعَابِدِ, the virtue of a scholar over a worshipper. Now, the reason why there is so much virtue for learning in our deen is because the more a person learns, the greater their rank is. And as Muslims, we view knowledge very uniquely. We don't view knowledge as just amassing information, gathering of information. Because a lot of information without practice is also of no value either. As Muslims, we like to learn and then implement. Learn and then implement. Learn and then implement. So what we learn, what's most important for us when we learn something is how we can implement it. We don't focus on learning a lot. We focus on learning a little, but learning to implement it as well. And what we learn, we follow that up with action. That's why Imam Ghazali rahmatullahi alayhi himself says that knowledge without action is a burden. Knowledge without action is a burden. If a person has a lot of knowledge but no action behind that, he says this is a burden. You have to answer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for all of this knowledge. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran, He gives an example of the people of the books, in particular the Jews. Allah Azza wa Jalla says, مَثَلُ الَّذِينَ حُمِّلُوا التَّوْرَاةَ ثُمَّ لَمْ يَحْمِلُوهَا كَمَثَلِ الْحِمَارِ يَحْمِلُ أَسْفَارًا. The example of those who are given the book and they did not act upon it is like that of a donkey carrying burden on its back. Because you could put books in front of a donkey, but the donkey will not know what the value of the books are. You can put, in Urdu we say, what does a donkey know the value of saffron? How does a donkey know what the value of saffron is? You put zafran in front of a donkey, he doesn't know what it is. He'll just think it's grass and eat it away. But he won't realize that saffron is something unique and it has a lot of value to it. It's great, it's beautiful, it's something unique. So if a donkey cannot value that, similarly, the one who has knowledge and doesn't act upon it, what it actually means is that he doesn't understand the value of what he has, therefore he is also like a donkey. It's like a person who has a beautiful sword on showcase in his house, but he doesn't know how to use it. I'm not saying you should learn to use it. If you'd like to, if that's your nick, then you can go ahead and do that. But it just becomes a showpiece. It's another thing. We go to many houses and we see that people have volumes and volumes of books. And it's becoming a trend these days to collect many books and to have usually one wall of bookshelves and just books there. But those books have never been read. So the books have now become a decoration. It's just there, something that, it's become a status statement that people come and see and they say, oh, this person has this many books. Maybe he's read all of them and he knows all of this. But the reality of the matter is the books will witness on the Day of Judgment that this person purchased me, but he never read me at all. That's how we as Muslims view knowledge. That knowledge is that you don't only read it, but you also have to act upon it as well. And the one who has the value for knowledge will do that. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran, He says, إِنَّمَا يَخْشَى اللَّهَ مِنْ عِبَادِهِ الْعُلَمَاءُ, which translates as, the people who fear Allah are truly the scholars. Or if I may translate it more accurately, only the scholars fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Only the scholars fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Why is that? It's because their knowledge takes them closer to Allah. And if you do not have knowledge, you can't fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because everything you do to try to take you closer to Allah, if it's not based on knowledge, in reality it'll end up misguiding you. This is why the second part of Imam Ghazali rahmatullahi alayhi's statement I want to bring in now. So the first part of Imam Ghazali's statement was that al-ilm bila amal wabal, knowledge without action is a burden. Wal amal bila ilm dalal, and action without knowledge, now action without knowledge will misguide you. If someone's really excited about getting close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, someone's really excited about their deen, but they don't have knowledge behind it. They're just trying to do stuff. People who are, at marriages, particularly in the subcontinent, when our marriages are conducted, we see so many bid'at happening there. So many. The other day someone called me and said to me, Mufti Sahib, I have a question. I said, yes. He said, I'm not sure, what should we do with the leftover water that's used to sprinkle on the bride and the groom after they get married? What's the question? What should we do with the leftover water that's used to sprinkle on the bride and the groom after they get married? I said, I don't know what you're supposed to do with that water, period. Forget about the leftover water. I'm not even sure if you're supposed to sprinkle it on the bride and the groom. And the one who called me said, Jazakallah Shaykh, I've got my answer. And they understood what I was saying. But the people who are sprinkling water on the bride and the groom, in reality, they're sincere people. They really think what they're doing is taking them close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then someone called me the other day and said something similar. And this call came from Pakistan. That someone called me and said, Mufti Sahib, I have a question. I said, yes, what's your question? He said that when we got married, there was a Quran that was carried over my wife's head while she was walking out of the hall. And traditionally we believe that the bigger the shade of that Quran, the more the shade of Allah will be upon you. So they purchased a very big Quran. But now my wife and I are going on honeymoon, and we were told by our family that this Quran has to follow us wherever we go, otherwise the shade of Allah will go. The Quran's too big to pack into our suitcase. This was the question. The Quran's too big to pack into my suitcase, what do I do? So I replied back to this brother saying, brother, this whole thing is just wrong. The whole aspect of carrying the Quran over the bride's head and the shadow of Allah being on that person, and there are so many issues within that. This is not established from the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. But when you look at the issue from its root, you realize that people that are doing these things, they're not doing them with the intention that they're going away from Allah. In reality, they're doing these things with the intention that they are getting closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They've made up a virtue for it as well. That not only did they do the action, but they made a virtue up. That as long as you have this Quran with you, now the shade of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will travel with you. We see in certain communities, a few years ago, we were going for Hajj. And the family members, they came to see off their relatives who were coming to Hajj with us. And I saw some of the family members, they started tying something around a person's arm. And it was very colorful, and there were so many ropes they were tying and tying and tying. So when we were cutting through security, I said to him, you better take that off. They're going to make you take it off in security. So he said, Mufti Sahib, let my parents step away, then I'll do it. So then he took it off. So I said, what is this thing? He said, he gave some name for it. I forgot something, Zamin. I forgot what the name was. Imam Zamin, sorry. I just remembered Zamin, the word Zamin. Imam Zamin. He said, this is called Imam Zamin. And the belief is that as long as this is with you, you are protected and secure. So I said to him, well, from the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, we also have something similar, but it's nothing to do with tying, and neither is it called Imam Zamin. It's called Ayatul Kursi. What do we call it? Ayatul Kursi. Now what happens with people who rely on these things, whatever you call it, the Quran or the sprinkle or the Imam Sahib that's tied to his arm, whatever it is you believe in, ultimately when you rely on these things, what ends up happening is that you end up believing the actual tradition that's proven from the Prophet ﷺ. So I asked that brother, I said, did you read Ayatul Kursi? He said, no. So you're tying something, and you think that this now removes the need of reciting Ayatul Kursi. When the Sunnah is to read Ayatul Kursi. So what happens with innovations have a unique characteristics. What innovations do is that they remove the Sunnah. They kind of take places of the Sunnah. And many scholars, they say the reason why innovations are such a major sin is because you're claiming that the teachings of the Prophet ﷺ were incomplete. If you believed his teachings were complete, then you would not have the desire to innovate something into the religion. You guys understand that? So this is why we need knowledge. When you have knowledge, now you know what to do. Not too long ago, I was in the ER ward, in the ICU ward, sorry, and there was a person passing away in front of me. The family requested that Mufti Sahib, we'd like for you to be there. So I sat there. I said, no problem. I came there. We stood by the person, the brother, and they pulled him off life support. In the process, then he passed away. I was there, and while I was there, I was just observing what was happening there. And there were many things that happened that were not really a part of Islam. But the reason why people were doing these things is because they thought these things are established, and they thought these things would take them closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So for example, now I was just observing, I came there because I was requested by the family to be there for support and for dua. So I was standing there and I was reading the kalima, as we do when someone passes away, you read the kalima, la ilaha illallah, la ilaha illallah. So I was reading the kalima, and while I was reading, the deceased, after they pulled him off life support, he began to bleed from his nose. It's common. Blood began to drip from his nose. Now, what they did was they took tissue, they put Zamzam water on there, and they began to clean it. So then I said to the brother, don't do that. So why not? Now, is there anything wrong with using Zamzam to clean the nose coming out of the blood? Yes or no? Yes or no? No, nothing wrong, right? But that's because we don't have knowledge. Now we know there is a tradition of the Prophet ﷺ that the Prophet ﷺ would drink Zamzam, and the remainder of that he would wipe it over his body. Yes or no? Yes? We know that for sure, okay? That he would wipe it over his body like this. So that's something that we should do. However, the scholars have said that Zamzam should only be used on the body as long as it is not being used to remove an impurity. So now if you have urine on your hand, should you use Zamzam to clean that? Now when you go to the washroom, should you use Zamzam after that? No. You have blood on your hand, should you use Zamzam after that? No. Zamzam should not be used to remove impurity. That's a masada, that's an issue of the deen, that's a matter of the deen. If you don't have that knowledge, you won't know how to act upon it. Now this brother, it's very possible he may have acted upon the deen his entire life. He may have, he was a very righteous person, I saw it. A person who was particular on the deen, and he acted upon the deen. And one of the last, wasiyas that he had to his family was that when I pass away, put a topi on my head. So they put a hat on his head while he was passing away. So he was a righteous and pious person. But the interesting thing was that his family, or those who came to visit, they weren't educated, and they were making him do things that he probably wouldn't have done during his life himself. So therefore we learn the importance of knowledge. There are so many things that we do not know about. And if we learn about these things, it'll help us get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's why the second part of Imam Ghazali's statement is very powerful, where he says, وَلَا عَمَلْ بِلَا عِلْمٍ ضَلَالٍ. And action without knowledge is misguidance. Tomorrow morning, someone gets really hardcore and says, Sheikh, I'm super pious, you guys are just mediocre, I'm hardcore, and from tomorrow onwards, I'm going to pray 4 rakat fajr rakat fard. How many? You guys are praying 2, that's nothing, man. I'm going to go hardcore, I'm going to pray 4 rakat. So what are we going to say to this brother? May Allah accept your intentions, may Allah reward you, but that's not how it works. Because in Islam, we have a framework for everything, and we have to stay within that framework. You can't innovate things and bring anything inside the deen that was not prescribed to us by the Prophet ﷺ or directly from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we learn the importance of seeking knowledge. Seeking knowledge is something that should continue in our life as long as we live. We should continue to learn, because no matter how much you think you know, the reality is you know nothing. There's a story they say regarding a young man who went to study at Al-Azhar University, the Grand Al-Azhar. And he went from Palestine, from Palestine. And back in the days when a student of knowledge would go to study, people would really honor that person and they would appreciate that person's journey. Because that individual is investing his life for the community. So when he was going to study, when he was setting off, they were walking him off to the boundary of the village. And everyone came to walk him out. The whole crowd came to see him off. And they farewelled him, he went, he studied. He came back 1 year later for Ramadan. When he came back 1 year later, the entire community once again came to receive him. When they received him, they asked him, "What did you learn?" So he said to the people, "I spent 1 year there and I learned so much that now I'm confident and I can say that I have all the knowledge." SubhanAllah. Now after Ramadan was over, they sent him again. The community came to see him off. He went. He came back a year later, they came to receive him. They said, "What did you learn?" He said, "This year I realized that I have half of knowledge." Now they sent him off again. The third year when he came back, he said to the people, "Now I realize that I have no knowledge at all." Because the closer you get to ilm, is the more you realize how little you know. And the example of this is like a person who's sitting, on the moon. Let's say, for example, there was someone sitting on the moon, and he sees the ocean. How small does the ocean look from the moon? Small, right? Now you're sitting on your computer, you're looking at Google Maps. How small does the ocean look in Google Maps? You think to yourself, oh, it's just from there to there? America, Europe, well, that's easy. 5 minutes, inshallah. Because it looks so small in the picture. But the closer you get to ocean, the closer you get, what do you realize? It's not actually that small. This thing's quite big. And if you're standing right in front of it, it's so large and it's so huge, you actually can't see the end of it. And forget the end of it in terms of its length. Can you even imagine how deep it is? Now, if that's the example of Now the ocean, the water of this world, imagine the depth of knowledge. That's why scholars have studied and studied and studied and studied. Until today, people are still writing commentaries on the statements of the Prophet ﷺ. Imagine that. If I said something, if someone took this lecture of mine, or if you were to record yourself for an hour and ask another person, can you please write a commentary on this? You know what their commentary would be? There's no commentary. Everything you said was a waste. There's nothing to write about. What am I going to write about these useless statements? But the Prophet ﷺ's statements had so much barakah that he said them, his statements are collected of, his life, 63 years. And until today, a millennium later, the scholars are still trying to understand the depth of the words of the Prophet ﷺ. So that's the reality of knowledge. So we gather here to seek knowledge. But one thing that I mentioned earlier, and I'm going to say this again as we move forward, it's important that as Muslims we understand that there is a cycle of learning knowledge. And you have to adopt the full cycle, inshallah. The full cycle of seeking knowledge is this. First, you seek knowledge. Then you let's take it a step back. You must be sincere. First thing, ikhlas. Second thing, seek knowledge. Third thing, act upon it. Fourth thing, convey it. So how many things are there? These 4 things give you a complete cycle of knowledge. The first thing is you start off with sincerity. Sincerity means you say to yourself that I'm here for the sake of Allah, and everything that I learn, I will do my best to implement it. I will do whatever it takes to implement it for the sake of Allah, and we're doing this only and only for the sake of Allah. So if there's someone sitting here who came here because your mom or dad kicked you out of the house and said, go and listen to Mufti Kamani, make use of yourself. Or you thought, let me get out of my house and tell my spouse that I'm going to listen to a lecture, and that's my freedom from my house. Whatever the case is, whatever intention brought you here, today you need to tell yourself that I need to change that intention, and now I'm doing it only and only for the sake of Allah. And there are 3 steps to securing your intention. The first thing is, in the beginning, remind yourself you're doing it for Allah. In the middle, remind yourself you're doing it for Allah. And at the end, remind yourself you did it for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then inshallah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will bless us all with absolute sincerity. So the first thing, sincerity. The second thing is, seek knowledge. When seeking knowledge, first of all, you must make sure that you uphold the etiquette of seeking knowledge. There is an adab that goes with seeking knowledge. If that adab is not maintained, then the knowledge, like I was saying earlier, is lost of spirit. When we sat with our teachers, with our shuyukh, the one thing they reminded us of again and again and again was the adab, the etiquette that one must have when seeking knowledge. Etiquette of what? Etiquette of the teacher. Etiquette of the book, and etiquette of the place where knowledge is being sought. 3 things my teachers used to always say. Ustad, kitab, darsgah. 3 things. These are the 3 places, 3 things that you must always show respect to. And the beauty of showing respect and etiquette is that the more respect you show to knowledge, the more knowledge gives it to you. You understand? The more knowledge throws itself at you. But you have to learn to respect it. Because if you don't respect it, then it goes over you, or it goes inside you, but the spirit of knowledge is lost in the process somewhere. That's why there's this concept of sitting at the feet of your teacher and learning and respecting your teachers. And this respect aspect, especially in America, has gone out the window. That's why people, when they see scholars or when they see teachers, when they see their shuyukh, they have no value for them. And even outside the discussion of Islamic education, even in the secular education. When I used to go to university, I remember I would sometimes open the door up for my professor. And not only would my classmates frown at me because they thought it was weird, the professor would frown at me. What are you doing? Why are you opening the door for me? I would say, no, it's just good character. As Muslims, we do this. And I would sometimes, I would carry the box that my professor would bring to class with all of the books in there, markers, whatever it was, and I would carry it to the car. And my professor would say, what are you doing? Let go of my box. So I would say, no, this is the respect we show to our teachers. We carry their things for them. We open the doors for them. We greet them nicely. We give them gifts. We look after them. We greet them properly, in a proper manner. We dress properly. We speak in a proper tone. We don't laugh above their voice. These are etiquettes that we have to hold when we sit in front of our teachers. And the more respect you show, the more the nur of that ilm comes inside you. Remember this one thing. And the reason why people have lost this in the 21st century is because knowledge has become easy to access. Before, knowledge was only sought through the scholars. That's why they respected the source of knowledge. But now people believe that they don't need scholars for knowledge. They can easily go online and get the knowledge. Now you can go online and get information there. You can maybe be able to get some knowledge from there, but it'll never compare to sitting at the feet of your teacher and learning knowledge. Because when you sit in front of your teacher and learn knowledge, there's a very unique connection that comes. Very unique connection. And we learned this from the hadith of Jibreel. You guys all heard the hadith of Jibreel, very famous narration. an anonymous person comes to the gathering of the Prophet ﷺ. And this incident, by the way, takes place just weeks before the Prophet ﷺ passes away. This hadith right here, according to many scholars, is considered as the summary of Islam. The full summary of Islam is in this hadith right here. It's one hadith, 1 page long. And the Umar radiallahu anhu narrates the hadith. He says, one day we were sitting with the Prophet ﷺ, and this anonymous person walks inside. No one knew him. لا يعرف منا رجل. No one knew this person was. And we were just looking at him. شديد بياض الثياب, شديد السواد الشعر, لا يرى عليه أثر السفر. That this person's clothes were very nice. His hair was very dark. And he sat in front of the Prophet ﷺ. And he sat in a manner فَأَسْنَدُ رُكْبَتَيْهِ إِلَى رُكْبَتَيْهِ, that his knees were touching the knees of the Prophet ﷺ. Which shows that if the knees were touching the knees, the chances are that he was sitting in the tashahhud position. وَوَضَعَ كَفَّيْهِ عَلَى فَخِذَيْهِ, and the student had placed his hands on his thighs. He was sitting in a very, you know how we sit in tashahhud? Because tashahhud is when we're sitting in front of Allah, so that's the most respectful position a person could sit in. And he sat like this in front of the Prophet ﷺ. And then he began to question the Prophet ﷺ. So the scholars, they use this introduction of this hadith right here, and they go into discussion of the etiquettes of seeking knowledge. That when a person comes, he should dress in his best clothes. When a person comes to seek knowledge, he should come clean. The narrator says, the person who came to the gathering, what color was his hair? It was very dark. It wasn't just dark, it was severely dark. Shadidu sawad ash-sha'r. It was very, very dark. So the scholars deduce from this, the best time to seek knowledge is in your youth. Because this person, he came while his hair was dark. So you can act upon it throughout your life. And then he asked certain questions to the Prophet ﷺ. And when he left the gathering, the Prophet ﷺ asked Umar radiallahu anh, do you know who that person was? And Umar radiallahu anh said, no. And the Prophet ﷺ says, جَاءَكُمْ جِبْرِيلُ يُعَلِّمُكُمْ دِينَكُمْ. That was Jibreel alayhi salam. He came here to teach you your religion. And that was one of the signs that the Prophet ﷺ took to realize that his life was coming to an end, because Jibreel alayhi salam came to give a summary to all the Sahaba of the entire religion. It's one of the fundamental hadiths that we have. So learning to respect your teacher, also respecting your book, carrying your book with respect. And when we were in madrasa, our teachers would never allow us to carry our Quran in our backpacks, because they would say the Quran is on your back, and that's not respectful. When we were carrying our Quran, we weren't even allowed to carry it on the side holding it down. Our teachers would say, that's next to your bottom, you're disrespecting your Quran. They would make us hold the Quran in the right hand and hold it against our chest. And if you're holding something in your right hand against your chest, where is that going to go? Right onto your heart. This is the physical aspect of it. You're holding that book against your heart, which shows that is serious respect. If you're not reading the book, close the book. Keep the book proper. Don't just leave it on the ground. These are aspects of respect that we should try to uphold while seeking knowledge. And the third is the environment in which we're studying. Alhamdulillah, we're sitting in the masjid, so that makes it a lot easier for us. But making sure that we respect the masjid, not doing anything in the masjid that's inappropriate. This is not the place for, Facebook or Twitter or texting or emailing. That's outside the masjid. When you're inside the masjid, devote yourself to what you're doing. So once we have these levels of respect, the adab that's required for seeking knowledge, now we can move forward seeking knowledge itself. So the book that we're studying is called Bidayat al-Hidaya, which translates as the beginning of guidance. In order to understand this book, we have to first of all understand the life of Imam Ghazali rahmatullahi alayhi. There's 2-3 major points. I won't give an hour-long lecture on Imam Ghazali rahmatullahi alayhi's life, but there's 2-3 major points that we have to catch on to. The first thing, Imam Ghazali rahmatullahi alayhi came from a family which had scholars in it. His brother Ahmad was also a very great scholar, rahmatullahi alayhi. And some have said his uncle and his family, in his family there were scholars that existed there. Imam Ghazali rahmatullahi alayhi lost his father, according to some, before he passed away, and some at a very young age. Regardless, he was put inside the madrasa to study. And Imam Ghazali rahmatullahi alayhi spent his day and night studying and studying and studying. However, at Imam Ghazali rahmatullahi alayhi's time, one issue came up. And the issue was that people were seeking knowledge for the fame that came with knowledge, but they weren't seeking it for the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it became very evident, because people were now debating with one another. So for example, Imam Ghazali rahmatullahi alayhi himself says that there was, for example, a very big masjid, and that masjid needed an imam. So in order to fit that imam position, what they would do is they would put 15-20 scholars into a room and make them debate. And whoever was the best debater, that person would be appointed the position. Kind of like your Big Brother theme, where you just put a bunch of people together, throw cameras on them, and whoever performs the best, they win the prize. When Imam Ghazali is saying that's not how an Imam is chosen. An Imam is someone who is senior, someone who has experience, someone who has spirituality, someone that has, deep knowledge. This is an Imam. You don't choose them by making them debate and see who's... And debating became a common mode of conversation amongst people. In debating, this is one thing that happens. When you end up debating, when debating becomes common, you lose focus of the debate. What happens to many people who get involved with debating and they make that their bread and butter is that they forget the purpose of debating. What ends up happening is when you become argumentative, you always want to win the conversation, and it's not about what's supposed to come out of the conversation, which is a pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Think about this. The last time you had a debate with someone, was it really, really sincerely about convincing that person of the truth, or at some point did your ego kick in that you just didn't want to lose the debate? And you get louder and you get more harsh. And that's how arguments and debates are. And Imam Ghazali rahmatullahi alayhi didn't like that. And that was a common issue that came up. Imam Shafi'i rahmatullahi alayhi, he gives us an example of debating. He says, every time I debated in my life, I made dua to Allah that I would learn something from the person in front of me. Allahu Akbar. He's saying, every time I engaged in debate, I was hoping the person in front of me would prove me wrong and he would teach me something. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made it such that haqq was on my side and I would be the one who would overcome that person. So this is the nature of knowledge. But what was happening at that time was becoming a scholar was now a lot to do for the position, for the name, for the money, the stipend that came with that name. You got a position, the Khalifa would pay you a high salary because you had a higher position. And this was something people were doing for the sake of just having a name in community and earning money. One of the biggest institutes at the time is where Imam Ghazali rahmatullahi alayhi himself studied as a child. The king of the time, there's a story recorded saying that the king himself had created the fund for that institute. And when he saw everything that came out of that institute was corruption, he made intention to close the place. He sat with his advisors one day and said, this institute that I opened for the sake of knowledge, I see that only corruption comes out of it. People are corrupted, they're lacking in sincerity, they've lost focus of seeking knowledge. So he made an intention to close the institute down. When he made an intention to close the institute down, he said to his advisor that before I close it, I'm going to do one last thing. So what this king did was, he wrapped himself up inside garments and kind of disguised himself. He went into the institute and he met one student and he asked him, why are you studying here? So the student said to him, the reason why I'm studying here is because my father is a big imam in another masjid, and my father has promised me that if I become a scholar, he'll hand the position down to me and I can continue on my father's salary. So the king said, Ya Allah, what is this? He then went to another person and asked him, why are you studying? This person said, the reason why I'm studying is because debaters are like, the pop stars of our time. You become a good debater and you get the name. I want to be a big debater as well. So the king said, oh my God, this person's studying for the sake of debating. So now he went on and asked a few people. Finally, when he lost hope that this institute was of no good, he made intention to close it. When he was leaving, he saw one young kid sitting in the corner and he was reading. And he came to this kid and asked him, why are you studying? So this kid said, get out of here, don't waste my time. So now the king became interested. Who's this person? He said, what are you doing? Why are you studying? He said, brother, don't waste my time right now. I have some important stuff to do. So then he continued to push him. Why are you studying? Why are you studying? So finally this young kid said, look, my mother has high hopes of me that I become a scholar. And that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will use me for spreading this deen across the world. So if you can please stop wasting my time, I'd like to get back to what my mother sent me here for. I have to propagate the deen. But in order to propagate the deen, I need to be a strong scholar. And right now, you're a barrier between me and that knowledge. So please, jazakallah khair. The king, when he met this child, he became so happy that he came back and told his advisor that I'm not closing the institute anymore. He said, why? He said, well, if 999 come corrupted out of there, but if that one child comes out of there sincere, I've done everything I needed to do. That child graduates from there and then becomes the grand Imam Ghazali rahmatullahi alayhi. And that was Imam Ghazali rahmatullahi alayhi from a young age. A sincere child who was there for the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because every grand ending has humble beginnings, right? Every grand ending has humble beginnings. Every doctor at some point was slumming around in some dorm, eating some leftover food from 3 nights ago. That's where every grand ending has some humble beginning. You ask anyone who's a physician, tell me about your college days, tell me about your days on the islands, and they'll tell you their stories that while we were on the islands, what was happening, and we were eating, dipping bread inside water and eating it, because every grand ending has a humble beginning, and this is Imam Ghazali rahmatullahi's humble beginning. Imam Ghazali rahmatullahi then moves on in his life, and like any scholar, he travels for knowledge. These days, we want knowledge to come to our feet. And when knowledge does come to our feet, we still don't go for it. That's the sad thing. In our world, when a class comes to our community or a scholar comes to our community, we think to ourselves, forget it, I'll just listen to the recording later on. I don't need to go there and listen to it. I'll listen to another lecture another time. Because seeking knowledge is now something easy for us. In those days, in order to seek knowledge, when it was low in supply, the demand was high. Simple business, right? When the supply goes up, what happens to the demand? It goes down. The value goes down. That's why they dump tons and tons and tons of rice inside the ocean. Why? Because if that grain hits the market, what happens? The value goes down. So they want to eliminate the extra supply to ensure the market value stays up. So now that we have so much access to knowledge, we've lost value for it. Imam Ghazali rahmatullahi alayhi himself, however, he traveled and went community to community and even from country to country to seek knowledge. Now one interesting incident took place on one of his journeys. Imam Ghazali rahmatullahi alayhi, when he was returning back from one of his journeys, a group of highway robbers came and they robbed him. Imam Ghazali rahmatullahi alayhi was a student. He wasn't like this big hunch, massive built guy or something. He was a student of knowledge. That was his life. So when these guys robbed him, they left him. However, Imam Ghazali kept following them. Now, when a robber robs you, what's one thing you don't do? You don't follow them because they're going to get upset. So they found out that he was following them. So they approached him head on. And they said, look, you look like a good guy, so we're going to give you this warning before we actually kill you. Don't follow us. So Imam Ghazali said, look, you can take all of my stuff, but there's one bag there, I have to have that bag. They said, why? He said, because all the notes of the knowledge that I gained in the past years while traveling, they're all inside that bag. So they started laughing. And they said, you call yourself a scholar when you're relying on this bag. If I take this bag away from you, you have no knowledge, you're no longer a scholar anymore, and you call yourself a scholar? You're still dependent on this bag right here. But they were, alhamdulillah, good people. They gave the bag back to Imam Ghazali rahmatullahi alayhi. Imam Ghazali rahmatullahi alayhi came back home and he spent the next 3 years learning and learning and learning, and then he memorized all those books inside those bags, and he said, I no longer need these bags anymore. And when he went to his mother then praised him and said, now you are a scholar. What is a scholar that's dependent on his books? A scholar is someone who's not dependent on his books. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us all like that, inshallah. And these are people who are smart, by the way. These are smart people. It was just a generation of people that are smart. The more technology we have, it's making us dumber. I was once sitting with my teacher, may Allah prolong his life, Shaykh Yusuf Mutala Sahab. I was driving him to a doctor's appointment. So when we were driving to the doctor's appointment, I was just telling him that, Shaykh, there's a new program out, and this program has all these books inside it. So you can have hundreds and thousands of books on your laptop wherever you go as you travel. So I was thinking of getting props from him because I was telling him about this new technology, because every scholar likes having access to books. So he started laughing at me. I said, Shaykh, why are you laughing? He said, you're talking about carrying books with you wherever you go. He said, your technology has made you dumb. And then he said to me, when we were younger, amongst our friends, someone who carried a phone book. Anyone remember those phone books people used to carry in their pockets before? They had like the alphabet running down the side. You would flick it open and it's like, old writing there from years ago. My dad used to have one of those. So anyone who used to have a phone book, we used to laugh at him and say his memory was weak. They would memorize all the digits off by heart. He said that's how it was back in our day. We didn't know phone numbers. And today, people don't even know their own parents' numbers. They don't know their siblings' numbers. It took me some time to memorize my wife's number. It's the truth. Our memories are gone so weak because we're so dependent on the technology. So Imam Ghazali rahmatullahi alayhi, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave him memory there as well. And what was Imam Ghazali rahmatullahi alayhi's memory? His memory was that he had memorized his books off by heart now. So this made him very special. Now the third phase of Imam Ghazali rahmatullahi alayhi's life, first as a young student, then as a student, and then the third phase is him being a teacher. Imam Ghazali rahmatullahi alayhi, when he took his position as a teacher, he was a very unique scholar because his mastery was in philosophy. He was a master in philosophy. That's one thing most people don't know, but Imam Ghazali was a master philosopher. And all the great philosophers at the time who were trying to use their intellect to prove how there is no such thing as theism, or they were trying to put fault into Islamic principles, Imam Ghazali rahmatullahi alayhi spent many years debating these people and writing against them. And because of his ubur, his mastery over these sciences, and his success in writing and also defeating his opponents in debates, Imam Ghazali rahmatullahi alayhi slowly reached what we call the rector position of the Nizamiya Institute. The Nizamiya Institute was in Baghdad, and it was the greatest institute of its time. And Imam Ghazali rahmatullahi alayhi was kind of like the dean. He was a rector. Now, if someone's a rector of a institute like that, and he is a master in his sciences, he reaches a position where every scholar in the world just wants to reach that position. That's every scholar's dream, to be at that position. And Imam Ghazali rahmatullahi alayhi was at that. So if you want to say Imam Ghazali rahmatullahi alayhi had knocked everyone out in the Royal Rumble and now he was the last man standing, he had reached a place where everyone wanted to be, Imam Ghazali rahmatullahi alayhi. The gold medal was in his hands. Now Imam Ghazali rahmatullahi alayhi, after being there, seeing how people used to bump each other to get there, seeing what was happening in the scholars underneath him, how there was so much corruption and people had no sincerity. They were just learning for the sake of learning, teaching for the sake of teaching. There was no mention of the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in any of this. People weren't acting upon what they were saying. They were saying that, you shouldn't do this, and then themselves they were doing it. When Imam Ghazali saw what was happening with the scholars underneath him, after he had reached his high position, he was disgusted. And what Imam Ghazali rahmatullahi did was, he resigned from his position. Now that was a very big step for him to take, because he resigned from a position that every person wished to be on. Kind of like imagining the president resigns from his position. He resigned from the highest academic position. Imam Ghazali rahmatullahi walked away from it. And then for many years, for almost 10 years, Imam Ghazali rahmatullahi, if you wish to say, he went missing. He was gone. He performed Hajj, went to Damascus, went to Bayt al-Maqdis, came back to Damascus again. And during this period, what he was doing was, he was reflecting and sitting with scholars of spirituality and developing his inner self. Finally, after these years were over, Imam Ghazali rahmatullahi came back home. And when he came back home, he said to the people that during these 10 years, I did a lot of reflection. And I really thought about what the Ummah was going through and what the fix to this was. And Imam Ghazali saw the Ummah was corrupted because the scholars are corrupted. If the scholars are corrupted, there's no hope for the Ummah. You guys understand that? But if the scholars are fixed, then there is hope that the Ummah underneath will also be fixed. So he said, what we need to do is fix this problem that we have in our academics, and we need to bring a spirit inside it. Everyone has knowledge, but we need to bring a spirit inside the knowledge. And this is where Imam Ghazali rahmatullahi alayhi, he then introduced to the people his beautiful magnum opus, Ihya Ulum. Ihya Ulum is a massive book. Depending on what kind of print you have, it could be from 16 volumes to 18 volumes to 20 volumes. It's this huge book. And by the way, according to most people, Imam Ghazali rahmatullahi alayhi wrote this book while he was traveling. If he was traveling during the 10 years and he wrote this book, what does that mean? He didn't have his library. So most of the book, where did he write it from? His mind. For 18 volumes, he produced the content from his mind. Imagine what kind of person, imagine what kind of knowledge Imam Ghazali rahmatullahi had. The book is called Ihya Ulum. Ulum means the sciences of the religion. What does it mean? So for example, zakat, that's a science of religion. Yes or no? Salah, science of religion. So he talks about the sciences of religion, ulumuddin. Everyone already had that. But he added one word at the beginning. What's the word at the beginning that he added? Ihya. You know what ihya means? Ihya means to give life to something. So there's something there, it's lying there, it's dead. When you put life inside it, that's when it wakes up. So Imam Ghazali says, you all have the knowledge of religion, but I'm going to share with you one secret. I'm going to give you the life to that knowledge. And that's where Imam Ghazali opened up the flood doors of spirituality on the people. And Imam Ghazali's main target when he was writing were the scholars. That's why when I read Imam Ghazali rahmatullahi's books myself, honestly, I feel intimidated. I feel like he's standing in front of me with a whip and he's beating the insincerity out of scholars. Sometimes he's so harsh in his language that if a person doesn't understand the context that Imam Ghazali was writing in, you could be turned off by his words. But the reality was Imam Ghazali was dealing with people who were insincere and were trying to develop their sincerity, and he was giving them that final push to bring them to the stage where they were trying to go. So Imam Ghazali rahmatullahi produces this beautiful book, Ihya Ulum. And he taught this book more or less until he passed away. 2 points I want to mention. And with this we'll end our talk. The first point I'd like to mention is that Imam Ghazali rahmatullahi alayhi, after writing this beautiful book, one person came to one of his students. Maybe he was from Chicago, Illinois. He went to Imam Ghazali rahmatullahi alayhi and said, Imam Sahib, there's an issue. You wrote a beautiful book, but there's a problem. Imam Sahib said, what's the problem? He said, the book's too big and no one's going to read it. That's why he said from Chicago, right? The book's good, it's beautiful big, but it's too big, no one's going to read it. You have to give us a summary. So Imam Ghazali rahmatullahi alayhi said to his student, I'll give you a summary. Come to me after Asr Salah with a pen and paper. After Asr Salah, his student came. Imam Ghazali rahmatullahi alayhi, he dictated to him from Asr Salah until Maghrib. May Allah reward Imam Shafi rahmatullahi alayhi, because, anyway, Imam Ghazali was Shafi'i, so that gave him more time between Asr and Maghrib. That was a joke. Anyway, so he started dictating after Asr Salah all the way until Maghrib. From Asr Salah all the way until Maghrib. Allahu Akbar. And that dictating of Imam Ghazali rahmatullahi alayhi was a summary of Ihya Ulum, and many scholars call it the introduction to Ihya Ulum. So he took basically 18 volumes and he summarized it into 40, 50 pages. And he said, this right here is a summary that you need to do. If you act upon this book, you're set. You can't read the book. That's the thing. You can't just read the book. If you open the book and read it, you could probably read it within 2-3 hours. It's not a huge book. It's actually a very small book. If someone has a copy of it, you can see. It's a very small book. But the point isn't to read it. The point is to act upon it. This is one of those books that you read one chapter every week. You read one chapter every 2 weeks. Once you read the chapter, what are you doing for the next 14 days? You're trying to act upon it. That's what it is. You note down the things. 1, 2, 3. These are the 3 new things that I learned. I need to start acting upon them. Imam Ghazali, more or less, what he's saying is that if you can act upon these 40, 50 pages, then I guarantee you the friendship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You are a wali and you are a God-fearing friend of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But you have to act upon it. You can't just read it. That's why this book is very unique. So every person says, I want to be a scholar. Every person says, I want to learn. And we're going to discuss this when we start the book next week. I'm just sharing with you an excerpt from the book, the introduction. Imam Ghazali says, people come and say, we want to learn. He says, if you want to learn, the first checkpoint for you to see whether you're even quality of learning. You know how people, when they get into gangs, they have to go through an initiation process? Imam Ghazali is saying, if you want to be a part of our gang of scholars, before you go through, I have an initiation process. I have a way to test whether you're even made of the material that it's required for a person to even be a scholar. And what's that? He says, for everything there is an end, and there's also a beginning. And for you to even walk on the pathway of knowledge, what you need to do first is you need to pass the test of being a student of knowledge. And what's that test? Bidayat al-Hidaya, the beginning of guidance. He says, act upon my book. If you can act upon this book, then you can go and be a scholar. But if you can't act upon this book, literally you're going to read his words. Imam Ghazali is very harsh in his words. He says, go do something else. Go fix cars, go take care of patients, go fix swimming pools, do something else. But do not come and try to be a scholar if you can't act upon this book right here. Because what he's training scholars to do is learn to practice along with the knowledge. So this is the context of the book of Imam Ghazali rahmatullahi alayhi that we're going to be studying. It's called The Beginning of Guidance. What's it called? Beginning of Guidance. Next week when we come, every person should try to purchase a copy and bring it with them. I encourage you to bring one. You can buy it from the Iqra bookstore. You can also purchase it online. Not only Iqra, I'm sure there are other bookstores that also sell it. I've seen it being sold in Iqra. That's why I said their name. You can go to any bookstore and purchase it and bring it with you, inshallah al-Aziz. It'll be beneficial so you can follow along and read with me through the text. And try to take notes as well, inshallah, to the best of your ability so you can take things back and act upon them. And ultimately, like I mentioned to you, sincerity, knowledge, action, and then what was the last thing? Conveying, propagation. So whatever you learn here, what my desire is that after we walk out of the masjid every week with our class, I hope that you can go back and teach it to someone. Maybe a friend, maybe a classmate, maybe someone, just a colleague, someone at work. Just share excerpts from there. I learned this week. Try to share with people. It could be through writing a little blog post somewhere and putting it out somewhere. But whatever you learn, try to teach it. That's a sign that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has accepted you for your knowledge. And as I always say, you never know you know it until you can teach it. That's the principle I study by. I never claim that I know something until I can teach it. Once I teach it, then I can say, yes, I know this and I know it. But until you can't teach it, you can never claim you know it. Once you can teach it, that means you know it. So try to make intention to go and teach it to other people as well. We'll close with the closing of Imam Ghazali rahmatullahi alayhi's life. His brother Ahmad narrates an incident that Imam Ghazali rahmatullahi alayhi, he woke up at the break of dawn, he did wudu, he prayed his Fajr Salah, and after he prayed his Fajr Salah, Imam Ghazali rahmatullahi alayhi asked his family members to bring his kafan to him, his shroud. Imam Ghazali rahmatullahi alayhi took the shroud, he kissed it, he put it on his forehead, and then Imam Ghazali rahmatullahi alayhi passed away. This was a very blessed death, if you wish to say. I know that may sound like an oxymoron, blessed and death. That doesn't sound right. But it was a blessed death. Because it's as if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had shown him that his time in the world had come to an end. And what more beautiful to do than to pray salah, and then take your kafan, kiss it, put it on your forehead, and then pass away. Just right now, before the lecture class, someone came and told me that, Sheikh, my father passed away 2 weeks ago. And he was telling me my father prayed Jum'ah Salah. He came home. He had a meal. He was going to do wudu for Asr Salah. He collapsed there and passed away. What better way that a person passes away while he's in wudu, or while he's holding his kafan, he's kissing it, and he's making dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allows us to learn from the knowledge of Imam Ghazali rahmatullahi alayhi, and that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala saves us from being corrupted scholars. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allows us to be sincere scholars, and that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allows us to maintain this sincerity as long as we live. Subhanallah wa bihamdihi. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك آخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته